Welcome to a Look Back Machine Shorty. Today we take a look back at Alien Encounter at Disney World, Florida, with the man who helped bring it to life, Jerry Reese.
Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter. At first, I was asked to come in and do the media for the broadcast from Planet X, but I first was dealing with that live broadcast and, Jeffrey Jones and Kathy and Shimmy and Kevin Pollak, and we had also Tyra Banks was our alien spokesmodel. And so I had gotten involved and I did things like I worked on drafts once I was directing and came up with the Spinlock and Dr. Femus names for those main two characters and stuff. Just one night I scribbled down the names. And as we finished it up, then I was anxious to go get involved with installing it in Florida. And there had been a team working on it for quite some time. It usually happens with the theme park attractions where there's typically years of work that go into the mythology and the architectural designs and different drafts and building animatronics and all kinds of things that go into it. So my media part, where I was doing all the sights and sounds that you would hear during the broadcast, was a layer, but there were these other layers. And so the rest of the team just said, no, you don't have to come to Florida. We know what we're doing. We're just thanks for the broadcast and see you later. So I went, okay, but I told them I was concerned about some of the storytelling elements, and they had some things where just the room went black, and they would tell me, well, the audience will think about the guy who's been sent to the other planet and this and that. And they would tell me this whole thing, which came from years of backstory from their mythology they had written and they all knew by heart. And I said, well, not if I'm just, somebody that flew in from Canvas and I've been on 6 rides already. And at the moment it goes dark, I might just think the ride broke. It's like, are you sure you're storytelling? They're like, we know what we're doing. So they went off and installed a show. And I got a call from Michael Eisner. And he and Marty Sklar, who was an amazing veteran that had worked directly with Walt for years at Imagineering, they had gone through the show and they just said, this is not ready for the public. It's like, I know we said it was open and we let people in, but this is not, this is not a show. So they said, Jerry, we need you to come finish the show. And I said, well, thanks. I was wanting to do that. And they said, well, we have to have you do that. So they kind of ushered the group that said, don't worry, we know what we were doing. They kind of ushered them off the scene and then ushered me in and brought in a wonderful producer, Rick Rothschild. They sent me and Rick to Florida to see what the hell had been installed of the Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter. So we went through and just immediately came out and went, oh my gosh, it's like there's this and this and this and this that we would change. And we made a list in about a half hour of all the things that would be needed to bring the story into shape. That involved all the rest of the space in addition to the broadcast stuff that I directed. So now I was getting to direct how all the elements would play for the first time. And so to me, that was what I considered the show. I know some people went to the other version of the show. I didn't really consider that the finished show, and obviously neither did Eisner or the rest of the team. The one that I opened after working with Rick was the one that I considered the real version of Alien Encounter. And it took us a half hour to make the notes and then 6 months to realize what the notes had laid out for us. And Bran Farron, he came in and collaborated with me on a really elaborate sound package for the space, which had not been there for the first iteration of the show. And we had things like subwoofers the size of refrigerators under the floor, and every single seat had an actuator where you could feel the thumps of something bumping you from behind. Every seat had a binaural sound system, so I got to direct all the sounds of the creature sneaking up on you. And when the creature was flying around the theater, Bran Farron had set up a really huge array of speakers that were in a big circle above you in the dark. And instead of sort of panning sound in like stereo or quadraphonic, this was like many dozens of speakers that were where you could send it from speaker 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and I don't know, 80 or 90 speakers later, it had made a single trip around the room. It was like a real many speakers that could take the baton and pass the sound off to the speaker after it. So really made the sound seem to move through the space above your head when it was on the loose. So we worked with those elements. We mocked up a lot of it in the Glendale Imagineering space. And we actually took somebody that was from Tokyo Disneyland. They were considering having the ride done in their park as well. And so a representative came over and just sat through our mock-up. This was not actually the real show, but it had the complete, like a pretty complete sound package. And it had all my, broadcast media. And then, but the creature was just it wasn't the full giant alien creature. It was sort of a stand-in mock-up that wasn't as elaborate. But they went through just the mocked-up version of the show, and the person had tears of fear in her eyes when the lights came up, and she said, "Oh, that was so scary." And I'm like really scary. And my whole thing was keeping it fun scary, like the Tingler theaters that they used to do in the 50s, where they would do a little shock on your seat and stuff. That was the spirit. And everybody that I cast was a comic. It's like even the guy who gets eaten was Jim Jackman from the Groundlings Improv Theater. And Tim Curry, I had a blast with him doing the voice of Sir. Tim Curry just had he nailed what I needed from Sir. I told Tim finally, I said, just kind of think of it like you're an evangelical preacher of tech. So you're like, from Planet XS, you're this robot, but in your heart, you're an evangelical preacher. And so that really helped him get to the mark. And it was great. It was just syrupy, wonderful excess that came from him. They did the little demo with Sir sending Skippy, the little alien creature, across the room, and he gets fur gets singed. And that was the fun tease where they're sending you in, and then they're going to take one of you and do the same thing and send you to the planet, and maybe you're going to get singed. So that whole tension of fear was meant to have a sparkling edge to it. And it could have been that the language barrier had taken sort of the wink off of it. And so this poor person that sat through our dimmer was just terrified without any sort of smile edge to it. I felt sorry for her. So they actually had me draw up a version, which I did do storyboards for, of what if it happened in Tokyo, but the guy narrowly escapes and doesn't get eaten. So I actually did plan that out. But I then just got to sit through test versions of our show as we did the hard work here in LA, and we spent part of that 6 months getting our sound package together with Brand Farron and getting some of the other effects together, the binaural sound with the creature, and planning when we'd have hot breath on your neck, and when we'd have a tongue device come out and lick the top of your head, and all these sort of scary things. We then got to transplant that into the Florida space and start workshopping it there. And I got to bring test audiences through. And it was the most amazing thing. It looked like a human rejuvenation machine. We were testing it in a really hot, humid part of the year. And so you'd see these poor people sweating and skidding their feet as they're shuffling through the park and all hot and about to melt. And some of our volunteers would go out and go, "Hey, you want to come in and do a test ride on a new attraction? It's called ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter. We're going to run some test shows, and you'd sign this little thing here, and you can go in and just be one of the test audiences things, so we can get some feedback." And so we'd get audiences full of those kind of people that would volunteer for testing, and they would come in, and suddenly it was like super air conditioned. It's like, oh, so that this would go away, and then they'd start to see the introductions, and it would make them smile, and then they'd start to laugh, and then be sort of nervous too. And by the time they came in, then they would get adrenaline pump galore, and then they would get the spritz of water from above, where the quote unquote blood that dropped on them was just room temperature water globs that would fall. And then later when we explode the alien creature, they would get bug bits in the face, which would give them another splash of water to the face. So it was air conditioned, it was adrenaline pump, they would get splashed with water, and they would shuffle in like melting, and they would come out leaping and talking to each other and laughing, and just it was like different people when they would come out of the exit. And it was so amazing to see that. So Rick and I would test timings and things with those test audiences. And we had something happen during one of the shows, and Rick and I were sitting amongst the audience members. And, of course, they never knew that we were making the show, but we just sat amongst the people. And it got to the part where Jim Jackman, the worker above us, gets eaten, and it goes dark, and then there's suddenly the splatter that hits people. And Rick and I are sitting there, and we're waiting for the spatter, and it doesn't hit us or anybody around us, but we hear people screaming on the other side of the room. So it had deployed over there. They screamed like crazy, and then a few seconds too late, according to our original timing, we got splattered, and people screamed twice as loud because now they were already afraid for what the hell happened to them. And then they were much more on edge when it hit them. It was like a bigger scream. So as soon as the lights came up and people were moving out, like Rick and I look at each other and go, that stays in. So we actually programmed it in, and forever after there was the two hits that would cause half the audience to scream and the other half to wonder what happened to them. And then boom, the second hit would happen. Then we played it for Eisner and Katzenberg and Marty Sklar and the teams of people, and I got the big thumbs up. They loved Tim Curry and the whole new version of the show and the timing and all that stuff. So they said, okay, now it's a show. Now they had another opening that was a re-unveiling of the show. And to me, that was the only one that was really the alien encounter that I had hoped for. So it had a run, but I think some people see it as a troubled show that had 2 chapters, and I always saw it as a show that wasn't ready to open anyway, and then finally was. So I'm amazed now that there are people that are fans of a show that's been closed for so long. And we had this thing happen to us where soon after it opened, it had been playing for a number of weeks, we got feedback that was very interesting. Rick and I had not expected this, but the people that worked in the park were approached enough times that they bothered to report back to us by senior citizens in particular, who would say, man, we had fun in the ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter. That was a hoot. Thanks for opening such a terrific show. And so Rick and I were like, well, why would senior citizens be the ones that are in particular talking about how much they love it? And the only thing we could figure out was it absolutely had the thrills. And if you watch home videos of it on YouTube, you hear people screaming like they're on a roller coaster. So it had the thrills of being on a roller coaster, but it does not throw you around and give you whiplash or do any sort of stress on your body at all, other than the thrills that you're feeling emotionally. And I think for the senior citizens, it was like, I got to feel the thrills of being on a roller coaster, but you didn't hurt me. It's like I was able to walk out completely without having going like, oh, my neck, why did that corner happen so fast? It's like none of that, but all the thrills. And we also put an age warning, and it was not meant for little kids at all. This was like Tower of Terror scary. And I think this problem happened where, because we were in the Magic Kingdom and not at a place like Disney MGM Studios, but they did have scary shows, and it was labeled as such in a different park. People did not expect to just send their young kids running around Disney MGM Studios and it would all be safe. They knew that there were different age ratings, and some of it was pretty challenging, and some of it was more for the adults or the teenagers. And so they would really sort of shepherd their kids more there. I think in the Magic Kingdom portion, that there was an expectation that I can just let even my young kids run around and everything is G-rated and safe. And so we sort of really were the one glaring not G-rated thing. And we had an age warning out front, like not meant for kids under, I forget whether it was 11 or something like that. But we'd see people coming in with really toddlers, and, we'd go up to them and say, look at the sign. This is really, really spooky. This is fun spooky, but it's really scary for a little kid that doesn't understand the context. And I worked with somebody who was in her 20s recently, and she said, well, I was one of those toddlers that my parents took me into Alien Encounter when I was little. And I said, oh my God, did you survive? And she goes, yeah, it was like scary as heck, but it was like thrilling. And she goes, I'm still here. But, I think that was ultimately something where they decided that it was surprising enough parents where they were like, oh, in the Magic Kingdom, I wasn't expecting that. I would expect it at Disney MGM Studios, but not here. So I think that caused us to close years before we would have. I think if we were opened alongside Tower of Terror, I think we would still be playing.